Recording has started.
Welcome to Lab 21. Question 1. A, inflation equals 9%. B, inflation equals 6%. Real growth equals 4%. C, inflation equals 4%. D, inflation equals 8%. Real growth equals 2%. E, inflation equals 0%. And F, inflation equals negative 2%. And real growth equals 3%. So 2A, you can see on the graph, high AD inflation is on the y-axis by the dotted line. High AD real growth is the dotted line on the x-axis. For B, so when she decides to fully reverse the rise in AD with monetary policy, the AD curve will just return to its starting point. So there won't be a new curve. And then C, if she does her job just right, the inflation will return to 10%. And for 3, the graph on A, you can see the green dotted line is the new solo growth, and then the red curved line is the new SRAS. And then for B, if the bank kept AD fixed, inflation is lower and real growth is higher. C, to return inflation to its old level, the central bank needs to increase AD by raising money growth. D, to return to real growth to its old level, the central bank needs to decrease AD by lowering money growth. And for E, yes, both C and D fit in with the cruel trade-off theory. The central bank can't meet both of its inflation goals, both its inflation goal and its real growth, because they can't raise money growth and lower money growth at the same time, so it's one or the other.
For question 4, it asks whether the following are either rules or discretions. And for A, that is a rule, since there is an automatic increase to Social Security each year that is consistent. For B, it's a discretion, since the amount that the Social Security increases by may vary by each voting process. For C, it's a rule, since there is a set amount for which the Fed may change the federal funds rate according to the provided formula. D is a discretion, since the Fed is able to choose its own course of action. E is likewise a discretion, since the police are able to question anyone who they deem to be suspicious. And finally, F is a rule, since there's a set criteria by which the police are able to question people instead of just determining who they deem to be suspicious. It has to be people wearing bulky clothes that may conceal a weapon. For question 5, it asks to illustrate on a graph what would happen if the Fed overestimates the pessimism that pushes the AD down by 10% instead of the actual 5%, and that the ADF, which is the red line, is shown, as well as the ADT, which is the orange line, indicating the false and the true AD curves, respectively. And for B, it states that what would happen if the Fed responds with a 10% increase in money growth. That would be an FRF, response to the false AD, shown in green, and an FRT, response to the true AD in cyan. And for part C, real growth rate will be higher than before, but inflation will also be higher. And for part 6, for question 6, it asks which of the following could the Fed use to maintain market confidence, and only option C would maintain market confidence, since the rest will lower money growth.
For question 7, it asks us to compare a theory versus practice by using an example of the Fed deliberately putting the brakes on money growth and how that affects the economy in the short run. And every time the Fed put the brakes on money growth, it slowed down the economy. So the theory worked every time in practice. For question 8, part A, if use the AD equation, and if the inflation was 10% and the real growth was 3%, You just add them together to get money growth as 13%. For part B, if he brought down the inflation rate to 4% per year, and you just use the same equation, and you'll get money growth to be 7%. And then for part C, if you assume monetary growth is 10%, expected inflation is, or monetary growth is 7%, expected inflation is 10%, and potential growth is 3%, you solve the real growth rate to be 0%.
For number 9, part A, there was a change in the equation for inflation, changing the value in front of the parentheses from a 1 to a 2. This then, following the math in the slide, this then gives us that the real growth rate is now 1%. And then for part B, the value that is outside the parentheses has been changed from a 2 to 100. This increase then, following the math, gives us that the real growth rate is now 2.94 or approximately 3, which is the potential growth rate. So for part C, if the central bank wants to have a real growth rate that is as close to the potential growth rate as possible, they would want to have a steeper short run aggregate supply curve. That means that they would want workers to have more flexible wages. Then for question 10, part A, we would see a fall in the real growth. Part B, we would see a rise in inflation, and then for part C, we will see a rise in the real growth. So this has been our Lab 21. Thank you, and we appreciate you for listening.